Hi, in this video we are going to talk about active transport. Basically, what is transport? Transport is nothing but the movement of substances from one place to another. In our body, movement of substances such as water, nutrients, electrolytes and even waste products occur. Basically, transport occurs in two forms, passive form and active form. Passive form has mainly diffusion and facilitated diffusion. What is passive form? Nothing but the movement of substances down the concentration gradient or an electrochemical gradient, such as the movement of O2, like diffusion of O2. Simple diffusion is where diffusion occurs through the bilipid layer, whereas in facilitated diffusion, diffusion occurs through a transport protein. Active transport. It is nothing but the movement of substances against the concentration gradient. To move the molecules against the concentration gradient, we basically require energy. Energy of any form. Here the energy of ATP is used, which is broken down to ADP and PI, and the molecules are transferred from a gradient of low concentration to high concentration. Let us know the difference between and the similarities between facilitated and active diffusion. Here we can see both facilitated diffusion and active diffusion occurs with the help of transfer proteins. But there are many differences, such as active transport requires energy to move the particles against the concentration gradient. Whereas in passive transport, it doesn't require energy because the particles are transferred down the concentration gradient, so no energy is required. Now let us discuss about the two forms of active transport, primary and secondary. Why is it divided into two forms? Here, the energy form through which the transport occurs are different. This basically divides it into primary and secondary transport. Here, in the primary transport, the transfer of molecules occurs against the concentration gradient with the help of ATP. But whereas in the secondary active transport, the transfer of molecules occurs against the concentration gradient with the help of an ion which goes down the concentration gradient. This ion is generally known as driving ion because it helps in driving the ion which is against the concentration gradient across the cell membrane. The primary active transport, the famous main example is sodium potassium pump. Here, the sodium potassium pump works to build up potential energy by transporting ions against the concentration gradient, such as Na plus K plus pump, which we are going to read afterwards. Here, the secondary active transport occurs with the help of sodium, mainly sodium, where sodium is known as the driving ion, which helps in driving the ion which is against the concentration gradient. There are two types, import and antiport. There are other types which I am not going to discuss. Coming back to primary active transport mainly occurs with the help of pumps. Mainly pumps, sodium potassium pump, proton pump, calcium pump, etc. etc. Sodium potassium pump, it is one main example of primary active transport. Here 3 Na plus ions move outside and 2 K plus ions move inside. That's why the coupling ratio is 3:2. With the help of ATP as energy, which is broken down into ADP and PI, the 3 Na plus ions and 2 K plus ions first attach to the transfer protein, and then conformational changes occur to the transfer protein, and then 3 Na plus ions are released outside and 2 K plus ions are released inward. This is almost present in all the cells of our body. Symport is also known as cotransport. Is a type of secondary active transport in which both sodium and the molecule which need to be transported up the hill move in the same direction. A famous example for symport is SGLT1, SGLT2, SGLT3, SGLT4, SGLT5. There are a lot of SGLTs within our body. Let's discuss SGLT1 and SGLT2 here. SGLT1. Now here we can look 2Na plus and the glucose molecule, where Na plus is the driving ion and glucose is the ion which is driven. Driving ion, driven ion. It provides energy to drive the driven ion. Here in SGLT1, two Na plus are transported, whereas in SGLT2 only one Na plus is transported, and glucose is transported obviously. From the cell, glucose is moved into the blood with the help of GLUT2, and the sodium is moved out of the cell with the help of sodium potassium pump. SGLT1. These SGLTs are mainly present in intestine, which helps in the transport of glucose from the food products. Now let's come into SGLT2. SGLT2 is mainly present in kidney. Here, sodium, only one molecule of sodium and one molecule of glucose is transported in the same direction. Here, glucose is reabsorbed with the help of sodium in the kidney tubules. And again, this glucose is again moved into the blood with the help of GLUT2, and the sodium is moved out of the cell with the help of sodium potassium pump. Antipode. Antipode is simple. Here, the sodium is transported literally in the opposite direction to the movement of the ion, which goes up the concentration gradient. The basic example is sodium calcium counter transport. Clinical. Here, sotagliflozin, it is nothing but a drug which is used to inhibit both SGLT1 and SGLT2. SGLT1 and SGLT2 mostly help in the movement of glucose, which is the main problem in diabetes. Thus, it is helpful in treating type 1 diabetes.